I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and I think at this point we can stipulate that Brett Kavanaugh is a tool of forces which most people listening to this program do not support, and that he and his entire nomination process take place at the intersection of a cluster of horrible forces now controlling this country. Now, if there's good news to be found in any of all of this, is that there are people fighting back. There have been powerful and eloquent expressions of opposition, including among the protesters who have been in the Senate chamber as the Judiciary Committee does what might laughingly be described as its work. And joining us now to talk about that is Rachel O'Leary Carmona. Rachel is the Chief Operating Officer of the Women's March, and she is a guiding force in the opposition to many of those forces we described behind the Kavanaugh nomination, and including those protests and demonstrations. So first of all, Rachel, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And secondly, did I say anything in that introduction that you disagree with or want to elaborate on?
No, I think it was a good introduction. I think we are at an inflection point in our country where we have to figure out who we are, and some of that is playing out in the halls of Congress right now, including not only just in the conversations about Kavanaugh's nomination and confirmation, but also in the hearts and the souls and the bravery of the people who are standing in opposition to that every day.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, because there is a lot of beauty and inspiration to be found in the opposition to these forces. But I want to start not on the beautiful side of the ledger, but on the less beautiful side of the ledger. In particular, I'm thinking of some comments from Ben Sasse, or Sasse, who's a Republican from Nebraska, who's kind of tried to cultivate his image with the press as a reasonable Republican, but I think that he's not too reasonable. Here's what he said. He was outraged, just outraged, that demonstrators would violate the sanctity of this rigged process by protesting within the halls of Congress. He said, and this is part of his comment, people are going to pretend that Americans have no historical memory and that supposedly there haven't been screaming protesters saying women are going to die at every hearing for decades. To which I would, by the way, I would interject, women have been dying for decades, which is the part he leaves out here. So the fact that he's addressing Kavanaugh when he says this, so the fact that the hysteria has nothing to do with you means that we should ask where the hysteria is coming from. Now, it seems to me that among other things, not only is this displaying an ignorance of history, but even though he doesn't call out the fact that a lot of the protesters are women, isn't it the oldest misogynist trope in the book to say that women are being hysterical when they fight for their own lives?
I would say it's one of the oldest, yes. But one of the things that Trump's administration and his administration's colluders are known for is dog whistle politics. And so saying things like hysterical women or things like that is very par for the course and is indicative of the type of general lack of respect and value that they've placed not only on the democratic process, but also on the feedback of women with respect to the destiny of our own lives and bodies and safety. So I think that there are a lot of very telling pieces in that quote. And moreover, I think that there's something in there about the disregard and disrespect in the ahistorical approach and commentary around the dissent that has been voiced over the last week. What is more, dissent is one of the most patriotic things and one of the most American things, and was rooted in the birth of our country. And so the idea that somehow that is not patriotic or American or somehow part of the process is very perplexing to me.
Yeah, and I guess I have to say I would be really depressed about this whole thing if it weren't for the fact that the protests have been so inspirational. And that's kind of the way I felt at the Women's March, to be honest, is that it was a depressing time, but the energy I saw there was so, and I went to the one here in D.C., was so positive and so uplifting. And I'll start, before we get into the specifics of the protest, you've been involved from the beginning. What's your personal formula, if you have one, for staying positive and energized and active in such challenging times?
Well, I've had a long career in activism, so one of the things that I think drives me, the driving force behind my career and how I stay motivated and positive, is that I really believe in the people. The way that some people come to the movement saying, I'm an animal rights activist, or I am, a water rights activist, or what have you. What brings me to the movement is working with people to help them build the futures that they want to live in. And so seeing that the people are motivated, seeing that the people are in the streets for Women's March, seeing that the people are ready to dissent and put their bodies on the line in the hearings for Kavanaugh's possible appointment to the Supreme Court, it is something that gives me a lot of hope, and it gives me a lot of motivation to continue, because I think really, and particularly when the government has abdicated in many ways its role as a leader in our society, seeing that leadership emerge from our communities, and particularly from women, is inspiring to me daily, and I'm really honored to get to be a part of it.
Well, that's a great answer. Thank you. And obviously implicit in your answer is that people can change their futures, and I believe that too. So I appreciate that. Now let's talk about the protests to Kavanaugh, to Kavanaugh's nomination. Do you have a sense of how they came to be? I'm always fascinated by the process by which protest in all its forms and dissent in all its forms comes into existence. Did you have a sense for how this crystallized?
Mm-hmm. I think there were a lot of people who wanted to do something, who felt a lot of urgency around moving the needle, around being really clear and strong in opposition, and making sure that their voices were heard in the process. And so we at Women's March work very closely with Center for Popular Democracy on a regular basis. And so when we thought about a mobilization with the history of our past mobilizations that have been very successful, it was really an easy answer to try to think about how we could create some space for people to be able to exercise their, constitutionally protected right to protest. And so we, had conversations and had a planning committee of a lot of really dynamic organizers who've been doing the work for both a lot of time and also short amount of time. And we kind of went forward from there, planning day by day with the feedback from the folks in the community.
So do you feel one of the roles of protest obviously is to reach people who may not have yet become activists, or reach people to know there's another side of an issue. So again, we're recording on Thursday afternoon. What has happened so far in your view? How have the protests gone? How's it worked out so far?
We're very happy with the protests. The people who wanted to come and make their voices heard were able to do so, and we were able to create this space and momentum and have the resources to be able to ensure that everyone could do that, regardless of their background, their ability to pay for travel, their ability to afford bail. So we were really happy to be able to support our members to be able to make their voices heard in the process. And in that, in the course of those protests, in the course of the statements that people are making to media, to the occupations, to the conversations that have been happening with senators in the hallways and in their offices over the last week, we do feel that the needle has been moved, as evidenced by the actions of someone like Cory Booker today, releasing confidential documents that shine some more light on Brett Kavanaugh's past. And, so we really do feel like they have been effective, and we plan to continue to meet the assaults on our rights that we unfortunately can anticipate from the Trump administration with the type of response that we've had this week.
So one of the things, and I'm really glad to hear you say that, and I was very heartened by what Senator Booker did. I was very pleased with it. In fact, I think yesterday I was telling people that, hey, why don't Democrats just do X, Y, and Z? And that's a perfect example of it. And so I think you guys did energize them a little bit. Let me ask you, one of the dimensions of protest in the modern era, where we're a gigantic, geographically diverse country and dispersed country, is the media. So obviously, one of the reasons, not the sole reason, we protest to change the hearts and minds of people, in the immediate vicinity, in this case, senators, but we also protest to reach the public at large. What do you think of the media coverage the protests have gotten so far?
I think the media coverage has been very good from what we have seen. Honestly, I haven't looked at every single clip that we've had because it's been a very hectic couple of days. But I think that the media is really honing in on the main message, which is there are very valid questions about the fundamental fit of Brett Kavanaugh in terms of his voting background and what he would bring to the court that really should have the opportunity to be vetted in the Senate. And that opportunity is not being presented with the withholding of the documents that would give the kind of insight that senators would need to have that conversation. And then there's a lot of irregularities with the process itself, the very holding back of those documents, the fact that people weren't allowed into the hearing rooms at different points in time, the fact that the amount of time that people are allowed into the hearing rooms are being limited, the release of the 42,000 pages of information the day before the hearings began, which didn't allow the Senate to have time to really, look in any kind of substantive way at any of the information that they have been given. There are just a lot of problems and irregularities, both with the process and with the nomination itself. And I think that we are at a place in time, particularly with the some of the revelations that we have seen with respect to the Russia investigation, that we should be at the very least taking a pause and really questioning whether the president should be able to be nominating the person that in the end may decide the fate of the presidency itself.
Well, that's for sure. And okay, so final question for you, Rachel O'Leary Carmona, which is, where do you see the struggle going forward from here? I mean, can we, first of all, is it possible still to defeat the Kavanaugh nomination? And secondly, what's the next step after that?
Well, what I hope will happen is that the senators on both sides of the aisle will show the same type of integrity and bravery that the protesters have shown so far, and ask the right questions and vote the right way so that Kavanaugh is not confirmed. Regardless of whether they do that or not, the people will continue to hold them accountable to the levels of integrity and transparency that our government is based on. And so we will continue to be in the streets. We will continue to protest. We will continue to lobby. We will continue to talk to our senators, and we will vote in 2018. And there will be swift political consequences for those who do not take the best interest of their constituents into consideration when they are casting their votes for Kavanaugh and for other legislation. And so ultimately, those are the next steps. That's what the future looks like.
Swift political consequences. Are you listening, Senator Collins? So Rachel O'Leary Carmona, Chief Operating Officer of the Women's March and activist deeply involved in the fight to prevent this person Kavanaugh from becoming a Supreme Court justice. Thanks for your insights on this nomination and on the protests against it, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.